Terrifying encounters. What creatures lurk in the shadows? Today, we're diving into two spine-chilling tales of people who found themselves face-to-face with terrifying creatures. But before we get started, if you're someone who's into the strange, the mysterious, and a touch of the dark, all wrapped up in story form, then you've landed in the perfect spot. That's exactly what we're all about, and we upload new stories every week. So, if that sounds like your thing, go ahead and take the like button out for a day at the zoo. But instead of stopping by the cuddly animals, drop it off with a pack of hungry, wild hyenas, and don't forget to stuff its pockets with hot dogs. And of course, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a single upload. Alright, let's jump into today's stories. Just past midnight on May 1st, 1971, a 20-year-old woman named Elizabeth Ford was asleep on a couch in the front room of a small house near Texarkana, Arkansas. Elizabeth and her husband, Bobby, were staying there with Bobby's brother and his wife, who owned the place. While Elizabeth tried to get some sleep, she could still hear Bobby and his brother quietly talking in the kitchen. Both of them were still awake. The house was surrounded by thick woods and swampy land, and Elizabeth had left the window open right above the couch, letting a cool night breeze drift in. Now, normally, Elizabeth slept like a rock, lulled by the gentle sounds of the forest around her. But tonight was different. She found herself tossing and turning, and that's because, as she lay there trying to doze off, she became very aware of a strange noise coming from outside. It wasn't the usual sounds of the wind rustling the trees or insects buzzing in the night. This was something else. It was a slow, steady creaking sound. At first, it seemed distant, like it could be coming from somewhere deep in the woods. But soon, Elizabeth noticed it was moving back and forth, right outside on the porch beneath her open window. And then, in an instant, her eyes flew open, her gaze fixed on the window. The creaking had just grown louder and then stopped completely, as if something heavy was sitting just outside. Elizabeth sat up to get a better look out the window, but she didn't see anything through the screen. Instantly, she felt relieved. Whatever that sound was, clearly, there was nothing out there. But just to be extra sure, she decided to lean in a little closer and take a better look to confirm there was nothing down below on the porch. So Elizabeth leaned forward, pressing her face right up to the screen, peering outside. And just as she did, this huge dark figure suddenly rose up, completely blocking her view. Elizabeth stared, having no idea what she was looking at. Then, before she could even react, this enormous creature slashed through the screen, and a big, reddish-brown, furry paw with razor-sharp claws tore through, nearly cutting her face. Elizabeth screamed and nearly fell backward, and in an instant, the dark creature outside turned and bolted away, disappearing into the night. Just moments later, her husband, Bobby, and his brother rushed into the room, alarmed, asking what had happened. Elizabeth was so shaken by what she'd just seen that all she could manage to say was, "It's a bear! It's a bear!" Bobby quickly helped Elizabeth up off the couch and then told her and his brother's wife to stay inside and keep away from the windows. Then, he and his brother grabbed shotguns and flashlights and headed outside. They immediately began searching all around the porch area where Elizabeth had seen what she thought was a bear. Holding their flashlights out, they scanned the tree line, trying to spot any trace of the creature lurking in the shadows. They searched everywhere, all around the front of the property, but there was no sign of this creature. The brothers exchanged a glance and a nod, then split up, each moving in a different direction around the house. They planned to sweep the whole property and meet up around the back. When they finally met up again, they still hadn't found any trace of this bear. Determined, they walked away from the house toward the tree line and did one more big sweep together around the entire perimeter, hoping for any sign of the animal. But still, there was nothing. After circling the property for a while, the brothers figured that the bear must have just run off. So they headed back to the porch to decide their next move. Now, both Bobby and his brother were experienced hunters, and they knew that with bears in this area, the safest bet was usually to just leave them alone. These bears could grow up to 500 pounds, and if they felt threatened, they could charge at 35 miles per hour. So generally, you stayed clear of them and they'd stay clear of you. But as the brothers sat there, talking over everything that had just happened, they both agreed. Something about this bear seemed off. For it to come right up to the house, unprovoked, and actually take a swipe at Elizabeth, that wasn't normal bear behavior. This wasn't just a curious animal passing by. It seemed aggressive, even dangerous. To Bobby and his brother, that meant they couldn't just leave it alone. They had to track it down and kill it to keep everyone safe. So, Bobby lit a cigarette to steady his nerves, and the two of them began laying out a plan for how they were going to hunt down this bear. Bobby's brother decided to cover the front of the house, while Bobby would watch the back. They'd each stay in their spots, keeping an eye on the property, until they either saw the bear and dealt with it or until the sun came up and they could go get help. With the plan settled, Bobby took one last drag on his cigarette, tossed it to the ground, and then, with his shotgun in one hand and his flashlight in the other, he stepped off the porch, circled around to the back of the house, and stared out into the darkness. Bobby had only been stationed at the back of the house for a few minutes when an awful smell hit him. At first, he thought it was just the damp, musty scent wafting over from the nearby swampland. But as the smell lingered, it grew heavier and more pungent, resembling that of a wet, decaying animal. Bobby tensed up, his instincts kicking in. He aimed his flashlight at the tree line, scanning back and forth, desperately trying to pinpoint the source of this horrific odor. As he scanned the area, Bobby suddenly heard the sound of branches snapping to his left. Whipping his flashlight in that direction, he caught sight of a massive dark figure charging across the property and disappearing into the forest. Instinct kicked in, and without hesitation, he raised his shotgun and fired. The shot rang out, followed by a loud yelp that echoed through the night air. In that moment, Bobby took off running toward the direction he had just shot. As he sprinted across the yard, he yelled for his brother, who had already heard the gunshot and was rushing around the house to meet him. The two men linked up, and as they raced toward where Bobby had last seen the bear, he shouted, "I think I got it. I shot the bear." But when they reached the spot where he had seen the creature and heard that yelp, there was nothing. No bear in sight. Still, the brothers felt a twinge of relief. Even if they couldn't find the creature, they reasoned that Bobby must have hit it. He'd heard it yelp. Maybe, by wounding it, they had scared it off for good. But just then, their wives' screams pierced the air from inside the house. Without a second thought, the men dashed back toward the home. As they got closer, Bobby caught that awful smell again, stronger this time. Right as Bobby's foot hit the first step of the porch, his brother shouted from behind him, "Stop!" But it was too late. The bear was right there on the porch, and that's what had sent the women into a panic. They had seen it, and while Bobby's brother had caught a glimpse, Bobby hadn't yet, and now he was too close to escape. Before he could raise his gun for protection, the creature lunged at him. Bobby felt a searing, tearing pain in his arm as it attacked. He fell to the ground, twisting and flailing desperately to shield himself. Pinned beneath the massive bear, he was level with its chest, its heavy limbs pressing down on either side of him. The horrible smell he had been detecting was unmistakably coming from this beast. It filled his senses, drowning out everything else. But then, in what felt like a miracle, Bobby spotted an opening to his side. Summoning every ounce of strength, he rolled and managed to slip out from underneath the enormous creature. Bobby scrambled to his feet and darted past the bear, slamming into the closed front door of the house. The door burst open, and he tumbled inside just as his wife rushed forward to shut it behind him, leaving Bobby's brother alone on the porch with the creature. But before anyone could react, the sharp crack of his brother's shotgun echoed through the night. Then, a long, suffocating silence fell over the house. Inside, everyone was frozen, hearts pounding in their chests. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and Bobby's brother walked in, his face pale and expression haunted. The room was so thick with tension that no one knew what to say. They all just stared at each other in shock. Finally, Bobby broke the silence, asking, "Is the bear dead?" With a trembling voice, Bobby's brother replied, "No, And that wasn't a bear. As dawn broke and light filled the sky, Bobby's wife drove him to the hospital, where he would be treated for shock and the wound on his shoulder. They had hoped to find the creature somewhere on the property, either dead or wounded, based on Bobby's brother's account of firing at it from basically point-blank range. But when they returned, the creature was gone. However, they did find its tracks, and that discovery confirmed what Bobby's brother had said. This wasn't a bear. Surrounding the house, they uncovered bizarre footprints and handprints imprinted in the dirt, evidence of a creature that appeared to walk on its hind legs. Each print had 3 toes, and its hands bore 3 long, sharp claws. The realization sent chills down their spines. Whatever had attacked Bobby was something far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. As unbelievable as it all seemed to the police, the evidence lined up with what Bobby's brother had described seeing while out on the porch. He claimed he saw a creature covered in reddish-brown hair, towering over 7 feet tall. After being shot, it had taken off running on 2 legs, and it was fast, terrifyingly fast. But the most chilling detail, according to Bobby's brother, was the creature's eyes. They were blazing red, burning with an unsettling intensity. When news of the attack reached the nearest town, Fouke, the locals reacted with an eerie familiarity. They knew exactly what this creature was. For over 200 years, people in that part of Arkansas had been sharing stories of a massive being, similar to a Sasquatch, that roamed the forests and swamps, instilling fear in those who dared to venture into its territory. The locals described the creature as fast and elusive, known for preying on livestock and pets. They referred to it as the Fouke Monster or sometimes the Boggy Creek Monster. But Bobby Ford and his family's encounter with this beast was unlike any tale that had been shared about the Fouke Monster before. While some folks claimed in the past that this creature had attacked people, no one had ever reported it actually approaching a home, trying to break in, and terrorizing a family. This was a new level of fear, one that left the community shaken. As whispers of Bobby's terrifying experience spread, the legend of the Fouke Monster took on a darker significance, forever changing the way the townspeople viewed the dark woods and swamplands that surrounded their homes. Bobby's harrowing ordeal would later inspire the 1972 horror movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. Over the years, some police officers and scientists have suggested that what Bobby and his brother encountered that night might have been a feral pig. However, authorities have never definitively identified what the creature was. To this day, hikers and hunters near the swamps of southwest Arkansas, as well as across the border into East Texas, continue to report chilling encounters with the legendary Fouke Monster. The mystery remains unsolved, leaving a lingering question. What truly lurks in those dark woods? And as night falls in those eerie, quiet landscapes, the stories of the Fouke Monster live on, sending shivers down the spines of all who dare to wander too close. On the evening of August 1, 2015, a 20-year-old man named Fraser Beluyi walked alone down a main road toward his village in the Limpopo province of South Africa. Fraser was on his way home from work, eager to get back. It was only about 7:30 p.m., and usually he would see other people out and about on this road, walking in the dusk, chatting, or running errands. But tonight, there was an eerie stillness. There was nobody in sight. In fact, in recent days, this area of Limpopo had turned into a ghost town. People were staying indoors unless absolutely necessary because, in the last 10 days, more than 20 individuals in the area had been brutally mauled. The victims had all claimed that the creature responsible for their horrific injuries was some kind of 4-legged demon, and they had taken to calling it the Beast. Now, Fraser considered himself a pretty level-headed person who didn't really buy into the hype surrounding this so-called beast. He figured it was probably just a dog, but even so, he had no desire to become its next victim. As he walked down the empty road, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Periodically, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see some lurking creature behind him, just waiting to pounce. As Fraser continued his walk, he glanced up and spotted a massive forest fire raging on a mountain, miles away in the distance. A few days earlier, the fire had ignited, and from where he stood, it still appeared to be going strong. In the darkness, it almost looked like the mountain was glowing a sinister red. Just then, Fraser noticed the turnoff for a shortcut that would take him through the forest and back to his home. When he reached it, he paused and looked over his shoulder one last time to ensure he was still alone. And he was. With a deep breath, he stepped off the main road, plunging into the woods and the encroaching darkness. Under the dense tree canopy, the night suddenly felt much darker. Fraser tried to focus on the chores he needed to tackle for his mother when he got home, determined to push thoughts of the beast out of his mind. However, he had only been on this path for about 300 feet when he heard a rustling sound behind him. Immediately, Fraser stopped and turned around, squinting into the darkness to identify the source of the noise. But all he saw was an impenetrable black void. For a full minute, he stood there, staring at the tree-line, waiting for something, anything, to move, but nothing did. Convinced he was just being paranoid, he reassured himself that everything was fine. With a hesitant sigh, he turned back around and continued down the path. But soon, his casual walk morphed into a frantic jog. He was almost at the end of the path, just a stone's throw from his village when he heard the noises behind him once more. This time, along with the rustling, there was a new sound, a wheezing, labored breath, like a sick animal struggling to inhale. In that moment, Fraser knew he wasn't just being paranoid. Something was out there, and it felt like it was stalking him. Without slowing down, he glanced over his shoulder again, but all he saw was darkness, just shadows shifting in the underbrush. However, when he turned back around and pushed himself to run faster towards the safety of his village, a loud crashing sound erupted behind him, like a massive creature had burst from the brush and landed heavily on the path. Fraser was so overcome with fear that he couldn't bring himself to look back. He just bolted toward the village, his heart racing, as the sound of loud, pounding footsteps echoed behind him, growing closer with each second. Instinct kicked in. He sprinted without a glance over his shoulder. With every frantic step, he could hear that dreadful wheezing sound, like something was seriously wrong with its lungs, and it sent chills down his spine. In his panic, Fraser tried to convince himself, it's just a rabid dog, that's why it's making those sounds. But deep down, he knew that didn't make sense. Whatever was pursuing him was massive. This wasn't just some stray dog gone wild. His mind raced as he navigated the dimly lit path, branches snagging at his clothes, each rustle of leaves amplifying his dread. The village was so close, yet it felt like an eternity away. Fraser pushed himself harder, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As the realization settled in, he was being hunted. Fraser kept sprinting, his lungs burning as he finally burst out of the tree line and into the safety of his village. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The moment he crossed into the open, the thunderous footsteps behind him ceased. He didn't dare look back. His house was right in front of him, the familiar sight offering a glimmer of hope. With desperation fueling his every move, Fraser rushed to his front door, his heart pounding in his chest. Just as his fingers grazed the handle, he felt an agonizing pain rip through his neck. The creature had leaped from the shadows, its weight crashing into him, and he could feel its hot breath as it bit down hard on the back of his neck. Fraser crumpled to the ground, instinctively throwing his arms over his head in a futile attempt to shield himself. From his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of the monster, a massive black figure pinning him down. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity as it gnawed on the lower half of his face, teeth sinking deep into flesh. Panic surged through him as he let out a strangled scream, the sound muffled by the weight of the creature. Fraser thrashed wildly, desperate to break free from its grip, but the beast was too strong. The world around him began to blur as pain consumed him, and he realized that he was in a fight for his life against something far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Fraser could barely process what was happening. The sheer terror had dulled his senses, and he screamed for help, his voice raw and desperate. As he struggled beneath the weight of the beast, he felt a surge of adrenaline but no strength to push it off. Just when he thought it was over, a flash of metal caught his eye. His mother, along with several villagers who had heard his cries, burst onto the scene, wielding shovels and other makeshift weapons. With fierce determination, they began striking the creature, their frantic shouts filling the air. The creature released its grip on Fraser, and he felt himself being pulled away, dragged toward the safety of his house. "Get inside, now!" his mother yelled, her voice cutting through the haze of shock. Fraser stumbled, his legs weak, but he was driven by instinct to escape. As he reached the threshold of his home, he turned back just in time to see the massive black creature retreating into the shadows of the tree line. It paused, turning its head to look back at them, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. Fraser's heart raced as he realized this was indeed the beast, the creature that had haunted the village for days. The fear that gripped him was replaced by a cold, chilling understanding. It had come for him, and it wasn't finished. As the villagers gathered around him, checking for injuries, the panic in their eyes mirrored his own. "What was that thing?" one villager gasped, still clutching a shovel as if it were a lifeline. Fraser, trembling and in shock, could only manage to shake his head. He was alive, but the terror of the night hung heavy in the air. They all knew now that the stories were true. Something far more sinister lurked in the shadows, and the beast had not only claimed its first victim, it had almost claimed him. In the days that followed, the village would rally together, fortified by fear but united in determination. They would come up with a plan to confront the beast, but for Fraser, the memory of that night would forever linger, a haunting reminder of the darkness that prowled just beyond the flickering light of their homes. As Fraser stood there, the weight of the creature's gaze pressed down on him, and an unsettling realization washed over him. This was not merely a beast. It was something else entirely. Its massive form loomed in the dim light, each breath it took punctuated by that dreadful wheezing sound that echoed through the still night air. The creature's pitch-black fur glistened like oil, and the way it held itself was anything but typical for a wild animal. Fraser's mind raced back to the wild dogs and jackals he had seen in the area. Small, multicolored, and often timid. This thing was not only enormous but exuded a confidence that sent chills down his spine. It stood there unmoving, the muscles in its body taut and ready, as if it were savoring the fear radiating from Fraser and the others. "What do we do?" one of the neighbors whispered, their voice trembling. Fraser's mother clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear, but there was a determination there too. They all instinctively understood that this was not just a hunt gone wrong. It was something far more sinister. As they stared into the creature's eyes, the air around them seemed to thicken with tension. Those eyes, too small, too human in their intensity, held a strange awareness, a sentience that felt alien yet intimately familiar. In that moment, Fraser could see that the creature was not merely an animal. It was aware of them, aware of their fear, and perhaps aware of its own power. The villagers stood frozen, a collective breath held in disbelief. The creature's presence was a challenge, a test of their resolve. Then, without warning, the beast broke the spell. It turned its gaze from Fraser to the others, its nostrils flaring as it took a deep breath, almost as if it were assessing them. With a sudden and terrifying grace, it turned to retreat back into the dark forest, its massive form vanishing among the trees. But as it disappeared, the villagers remained rooted to the spot, hearts pounding in their chests. The night had changed. It was no longer just an evening walk home. They now shared a bond forged in fear, knowing that their lives would never be the same. "We need to prepare," Fraser's mother finally said, her voice steady but urgent. "This isn't over." As the villagers began to gather their thoughts and plan their next steps, Fraser couldn't shake the feeling that the creature had not just come to attack. It had come to test them. And if they didn't find a way to confront whatever darkness lurked in those woods, they might very well find themselves facing the beast again. This time, they wouldn't be so lucky. The next day, the village elders gathered in the center of the small community, their faces grave with concern. Word of Fraser's attack had spread like wildfire, and the palpable fear in the air was thick enough to cut. Villagers whispered among themselves, casting wary glances toward the forest where the creature had been seen, a darkness looming just beyond the tree line. The elders convened beneath the large baobab tree, a gathering place for important discussions. Fraser's mother, still shaken but resolute, stood by her son's side as they listened to the elders formulate a plan. "We can no longer sit idly by while this beast terrorizes our village," Elder Mackay declared, his voice steady and commanding. "We must take action before it attacks again. We cannot let fear dictate our lives." Some villagers nodded in agreement, while others exchanged fearful glances, remembering the previous attacks and the gruesome stories that had begun circulating about the beast. They discussed setting traps and fortifying their homes, but Elder Mackay had a different idea. "We need to confront this creature directly," he said, his eyes burning with determination. "We cannot allow it to hold us hostage in our own village. I propose we gather a group of brave souls to venture into the woods. We will hunt the beast." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. "What if it's too powerful? What if we become its next victims?" One villager asked, voicing the fears that lingered in everyone's hearts. Elder Mackay raised his hand to silence the crowd. "This is not just a creature. It's a demon, a manifestation of our fears. We cannot show weakness. If we work together, we can defeat it." After a long debate, a handful of villagers stepped forward, volunteers ready to face the unknown. Fraser's mother, despite her own fear, insisted that Fraser accompany her. "He faced it once. He deserves to confront it again," she insisted. The elders reluctantly agreed, realizing they needed to rally the village around a common goal. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, the small group of hunters prepared. Armed with makeshift weapons, wooden spears, clubs, and a few hunting rifles borrowed from the local hunters, they set out toward the forest. With each step, Fraser felt a mix of fear and determination. The haunting wheezing sound echoed in his mind, but he refused to let it overpower him. He had come face to face with the beast. He had survived, and now he had a chance to help protect his home. As they approached the edge of the woods, the air grew colder, and a strange silence enveloped them. The sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures awakening. The hunters moved cautiously, scanning the shadows for any sign of the creature. Fraser felt the weight of the eyes upon him, the villagers watching, waiting for them to return victorious. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, doubt began to creep in. Was the beast truly just a dog, as some had claimed, or was it something far more sinister? Suddenly, a low growl broke the stillness, sending shivers down their spines. The group froze, instinctively forming a tight circle, weapons at the ready. The growl grew louder, more menacing, echoing through the trees, and then, without warning, the creature emerged from the shadows. It was bigger than they had imagined, its eyes glowing with that same eerie light as it locked onto Fraser. Panic surged through him as he gripped his weapon tightly, heart racing. The hunt had begun, but this time, it was not just about survival. It was a fight to reclaim their village from the grasp of the demon that lurked in the woods. The villagers breathed a collective sigh of relief when the attacks finally ceased. The elders returned from their pilgrimage to the burning mountain, their faces marked by exhaustion but also by a newfound resolve. They spoke of a ritual that had not only appeased their ancestors but had also, they believed, banished the demon that had tormented them. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the village shifted. People began to venture outside again, slowly reclaiming their lives. Children laughed and played, and neighbors exchanged stories of resilience, but a shadow lingered in the back of their minds. Despite the calm, whispers of the beast persisted, weaving into the fabric of their everyday conversations. Fraser, while healing from his wounds, often found himself reflecting on that harrowing night. The vivid memory of the creature's piercing eyes haunted him, as did the chilling sound of its wheezing breath. He felt an odd mix of gratitude for surviving and unease for what had transpired. Many villagers treated him like a hero, but Fraser knew he was merely a survivor, a reminder of the terror that had gripped their lives. As time passed, stories about the beast transformed into local legends. They claimed it was a demon unleashed from the depths of the burning mountain, sent to punish the villagers for some unknown transgression. The elders warned that the beast could return if they didn't honor their ancestors properly. The ritual had been a temporary solution, they insisted, and so the villagers began to hold regular ceremonies to pay respect to their heritage. But even as they sought to appease their ancestors, rumors of other sightings began to trickle in from neighboring areas. People spoke of similar encounters, of creatures that bore striking resemblances to the beast, with the same eerie wheezing and menacing presence. Each story echoed the same sentiment. Something dark had stirred in the night, something that refused to be ignored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened across the village, Fraser sat outside his home with a group of friends. They exchanged tales, both true and exaggerated, of their encounters with the beast. The laughter turned nervous as someone mentioned the recent reports from nearby villages. "What if it's back?" one friend said, glancing nervously toward the forest. As if on cue, a strange sound echoed through the trees. A low growl followed by that unmistakable wheezing. The laughter died abruptly, and fear gripped the group. They exchanged worried glances, minds racing with memories of that fateful night. Fraser's heart raced as he stood, the chilling sound sending adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let's go check it out," he said, attempting to sound braver than he felt. But the others hesitated, fear flashing in their eyes. "I don't think we should," another friend replied, voice shaking. "What if it's really back?" Despite the unease, the call of curiosity proved stronger than the instinct to flee. Fraser led the way, moving cautiously toward the edge of the forest. The deeper they ventured, the heavier the air became, filled with tension and unspoken fears. As they reached the tree line, the moon broke through the clouds, casting an ethereal glow over the path. Suddenly, the growling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The group stood frozen, hearts pounding in their chests. Just when they thought it was over, something massive moved in the shadows, a dark silhouette barely illuminated by the moonlight. Fraser's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with the creature. It was there, larger than before, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, locked onto him as if it recognized him. The memories of pain and terror flooded back. The wheezing sound echoed again, and he felt the ground beneath him shift, a primal instinct urging him to run. But before he could react, a voice broke through the tension. It was Elder Mackay's, emerging from the darkness with a handful of villagers who had come to investigate the disturbance. "Back away!" he shouted, raising a spear high. The beast paused, as if considering its next move, and for a moment, everything hung in the balance. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and melted into the shadows, leaving nothing but an unsettling silence in its wake. The villagers stood in shock, breathless and wide-eyed. They had come face to face with the demon they had feared, but instead of a battle, they had been met with an eerie retreat. "What does this mean?" Fraser whispered, heart still racing. Elder Mackay's looked grim. "It means the beast is still out there, and we have only begun to scratch the surface of this darkness," he replied. "We must be vigilant, for our fight is far from over." As they turned back toward the village, the weight of their shared experience settled heavily on their shoulders. The creature might have vanished into the night, but its presence lingered in their minds, a reminder that some legends refuse to fade away, and the line between myth and reality is often blurred by fear. This journey is not just about sharing stories. It's an opportunity for us to explore the mysteries, confront our fears, and learn valuable lessons from these experiences. I genuinely look forward to meeting each of you, to share unforgettable moments together. Let's transform these mysteries into beautiful memories. I can't wait to see you at the shows.